I asked 50 of the most successful people I know the best piece of career advice they've ever received, and I compiled it in this video. If this is the first time that you see my face, hello, hi, my name is Aleesha. I'm a management consultant and a podcast host. Over on my podcast called To My Younger Self, I bring on successful people from different industries, founders, CEOs, directors in tech, banking, law. We always ask them at the end of every episode what is one piece of advice that they would give to their younger self. And I thought, do you know what? I'm going to compile in a video all of the best pieces of advice that I've heard. I'm really thankful to God that I'm surrounded by so many incredible, successful, hardworking people. And I called them all, and I was just randomly like, out the blue, what is the best piece of career advice that you've received? Here's my call logs to prove it, like I've literally been on the phone. I wrote down everyone's pieces of advice, and it's just so incredible, and I can't wait to share them with you guys. Let's get into it. So the first one, and I'm starting with this one because I feel like this is the most commonly said piece of advice in all of my podcast videos. I think every single guest has said this. Be delusional. Be delusional when you think about what you can achieve and back yourself relentlessly. Dream as big as you want. Don't put limits on what you can achieve. Also be delusional in the sense of knowing that you will achieve those dreams. That's the next step. And I feel like this is so important. This is probably why every guest has said it. Manifestation is so real, and the mind is such a powerful tool. If I tell myself I can do something, if you tell yourself you can achieve something, you can then make that your reality. And that is really the first step, which is why I think I'm putting it at the start of this list. It's the first step. Before you start working hard towards any goals, before you start writing down goals, you first need to actually believe in your mind and be delusional and know that you will be successful in whatever it is that you want to do, whatever it is you want to achieve. I am really an advocate for this, and I feel like this is something that I do in my everyday life. For example, even with the podcast, we were very intentional when we was writing our introduction jingle. So at the start of every episode we say, welcome to My Younger Self. In fact, I've even forgot my own jingle, which is ridiculous. Welcome back to another episode of To My Younger Self. The #1 support network for students and graduates, made by young people for young people. It's Aleesha, it's your girl Praise. But it's that key part, the #1 support network for students and graduates. We ain't #1. Who said we're #1? I'm manifesting it. Me and Praise are manifesting that it is the #1 support network for students and graduates. And it's about being delusional in those moments and backing your own ideas, because if you don't, who else is going to back it? And a lot of people might put doubts onto your ideas. People didn't say this to me directly, to be honest. I'm very lucky to have a supportive network, but I imagine there would have been people out there when I started my YouTube channel, when I started my podcast, when I'm trying to do certain things or trying to break out of certain situations, break certain boundaries, that probably didn't believe me and probably put a limit on what I can achieve. But I didn't succumb to that because I was so delusional. This really was important in my childhood. So for those that don't know, I grew up in a state educated background, grew up in a council estate, travelled all around the UK, so lived in different places, had a very unstable childhood. I was so delusional in thinking that I am going to escape this circumstance and I'm going to improve my family's trajectory, my family's lives, no matter what. I think that really helped me in terms of moving forward in my career. I think what fits into this nicely is the power of the tongue. What you say is actually your reality, and I'm a strong believer of that, and that's actually something that I'm trying to even change and work on myself. If you keep telling yourself that you can't do something, you can't achieve something, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, then that will actually become your reality. You can't keep putting negativity out into the world and expecting to receive positive outcomes. So speak affirmations and positive outcomes into your existence, because your words genuinely have the power to shape your reality. Another tip around this, something that I find helpful, is creating vision boards to visualize what my future future will look like so that I can work towards that visualization. I actually have my vision board in my living room framed. Another thing is actually writing down my goals. So I have this journal from Clever Fox. Shout out to Clever Fox for sending me this. In the back of it, I wrote down all of my goals for 2025 and for my life. I think just like writing these down, it's something so powerful about writing your goals down to paper and just revisiting them every so often. And I've noticed that I actually have already achieved like 3 of these 15 goals already, and it's only been 2 months into the year, because it's like I've wrote them down and I'm manifesting that these things are going to happen. Second important part is actually revisiting them and working towards them. I think as well, under this topic of being delusional and backing yourself, don't let imposter syndrome consume your life. We all have imposter syndrome, and I think it's important to recognize when you have that, when you feel like you're inadequate in the rooms that you're in, you feel like you don't belong in the spaces that you are. But I think it's about making sure that it doesn't overcome you, and this is something that I am working on. Recognizing your worth and your capabilities, knowing that you're in that room for a reason, and refusing to let self-doubt dominate your mind. Just to give an example, the day before I started my job in consulting, I actually had a breakdown because I just got so worked up and felt like I was so inadequate to be going into this job, coming from my background where it's unheard of to have a job like this. Going into that career, I felt like very overwhelmed and very inadequate. And then it's like you go into it and it's absolutely fine. Like there's no need to worry and to have these self-doubts. I actually got the job for a reason, and I think it's important to remind yourself that you are worthy and that you are capable of being where you are. Let your dreams be bigger than your fears, and don't let fears hold you down and hold you back from achieving those dreams that you have for your life. The second piece of advice I have is to work hard, and this might sound generic, but I think it flows on quite nicely from the first piece of advice. It's great to dream big. I think that's the first step, but you don't just want to dream so big and then not actually work hard to making those dreams a reality. You want your actions to be louder than just simply dreaming, so that you can transition from just dreaming about things to actively doing things. When I called my friend Toby, he said as well that this is even a fear of his, dreaming so big and just letting life pass you by. The way to overcome that fear is actually to work hard to achieving those goals and to working towards your dream. You've probably all heard of the 10,000 hour rule. This is the idea or the theory that it takes 10,000 hours to actually master a skill. It takes a lot of time to master things, and it's important to master your craft, work towards actually getting better at what you're doing, being dedicated to practicing and learning certain skills, because you want to position yourself in a place where you are the best at what you do. So whether that's coding, whether that's Excel, presentation, you want to be the best at what you do so that you're known in the workplace as Aleesha. She's that girl that you go to when you need a good slide. Like, she will format your slide in 10 seconds. You want to get really good at your craft, because that's how you become successful. My friend Chibs, when I called and asked for his advice, he's also a consultant, he said that one of the best pieces of advice that he received was to know your stuff. Knowing your stuff, being good at what you do, and simply putting in that work and putting in those hours. And yes, I think it's easier said than done. It's extremely difficult to throw yourself out of bed at 6 a.m. in the morning and go to school and learn these difficult concepts at school, and it's difficult to drag yourself to uni and listen along in a lecture and try and grasp a concept. It's difficult to work long hours in corporate jobs and then barely get any sleep and then go back into the office the next day. All of it is very difficult, of course, but one piece of advice that I like to say is choose your difficult, like choose your battle and choose your hard, because one of my things that I'm scared of is just existing, like not actually getting to live life to the fullest. For me, I would rather work hard in terms of the hours that I'm putting in and expanding my mind, learning new concepts, than suffering by not being able to live life to the fullest, because that is also a hard life. I think it's hard to sit down, to not be able to actually live life, and to not be able to have these dreams and passions for your life and make them a reality, whether that is traveling the world, whether it's buying your dream car, all of these things that you might have envisioned for your life. And I think it's hard to sit down and for those things to pass you by. So choose your hard, build your future with intention determination, passion, and courage. We're so privileged, actually. Like, we're so privileged, and I think it's important to recognize your privileges too. I say that I came from a very difficult background, but I'm also extremely privileged in so many ways. Being in a developed country, being able, I have so many privileges, guys. I'm so grateful. I've literally got a laptop. I just almost broke my charger there. I've got a camera, I've got a phone, I've got a roof over my head, I've got electricity. There's so many privileges that we have, and I almost feel like it's wrong to not cultivate your privileges and the gifts and talents that you're given, if that makes sense. You might be complaining about going to school at 6 a.m, but you have to recognize that you're actually privileged to be able to go to school in the first place. There's so many people across the world that don't even have access to that. We might be complaining about our job. Well, you're so privileged to be in the position where you can even complain about having a job. There's so many people that can't even access that as well and can't access the job market, and I think that is super important as well on that topic of working hard and choosing your battles. The next piece of advice that is commonly said on the podcast is about being flexible and adaptable. I actually filmed an episode again today with two founders from Dragon's Den who also repeated this as well. Their names are Zara and Aaron, shout out to them, and they founded Chopity. This is something that has been repeated by Liz, who's a director at Microsoft, Aleesha, who's founded her own consulting firm. I think so many people have reiterated this advice. The key theme is that there's more than one way to be successful, there's more than one way to have an impact, and there's more than one way to touch the lives of others. So just know there's not a singular route for how you are going to be successful. There's not a singular path. It's important to be open-minded in terms of your career decisions. I think a good example is I had my heart set on being a politician when I entered university, and then I changed my mind a few times, and then I explored consulting. Having that flexibility in terms of my goals allowed me to find my job now and to find what I love doing. So it's really important to have that, because I think we all have this vision for our life when we're young, but you learn new things as you go along. I didn't know what consulting was when I was a child. I only learned about that very recently, so how could I have envisioned that for my future when I was younger? So yeah, it's very important to not put all of your eggs into one basket. On that topic as well is embracing the discomfort of growth, because growth happens outside of your comfort zone. This was a piece of advice that Praise gave today on the podcast. Just embracing those uncomfortable feelings that comes with being outside of your comfort zone and that comes with change. For example, when I mentioned that I had a breakdown the day before I started work, you have to check yourself and you have to embrace that yes, it is uncomfortable going through such a big change and coming from a low-income background to entering this incredible job, but it's important to embrace that uncomfortability around that change, because otherwise you are not going to grow as a person and you'll just stay in what you're familiar with. So I think that is really important, and it is hard to come to terms with, but you just have to recognize that that is where the most growth happens. The next piece of advice is being a people person and being your authentic self. This piece of advice comes from Tilly, who's a director at PwC, as well as Liz, who's a director at Microsoft. They spoke about the importance of just being likable in your workplace. I think people quite underestimate the power of just being a nice person, actually, in terms of getting promotions and advancing in your career. It's important to actually just be nice. So whether you're extroverted or you're introverted, remember that you can use your unique personality traits to help you in terms of networking, actively going out there, seeking new connections, seeking out new relationships in the workplace, because those sort of interactions is what helps you advance in your career. Another piece of advice linking to this topic that comes from my friend Kassarat, who's a consultant, and Reggie Nelson, who he's recently been promoted to vice president at Blackstone. Shout out to Reggie if you're watching this. The piece of advice that they gave is staying true to yourself and your principles and your values. I think this is so important, and this is such a under talked about piece of career advice. It's so easy to lose yourself. For example, if you don't drink, or if you don't want to do unethical projects, then stick to that don't compromise those values to advance yourself in your career, because otherwise you will lose who you are fundamentally as a person, and in a few years you simply won't recognize who you are when you look in the mirror. Some other people might feel like they have to compromise those things and go to pubs for work socials in order to be promoted, which I can see the logic in it, because obviously naturally we all think about career advancement, but I think it's equally as important to not lose your fundamental values. Those make you who you are at the end of the day. Advice number 5 is to build valuable connections with your mentors. I think for me, this is probably the piece of advice that resonates with me most in this list. If I didn't have mentors, I would not be here. I would not be sat here today. Mentorship has played such an important role in my life and in my career. It's actually incredible. One piece of advice that Will Meldrum, shout out to Will, who is the manager of my scholarship when I was at university, something that he says is to build a board of directors for your life. And what he means by that is having a group of advisors for different areas of your life. Usually when we talk about mentors, you think about it only in a career sense, but you can actually have mentors for your life, for work, for investments, for personal growth. Like, I have loads of mentors and I go to them all about different things. I might go to one mentor about something that's going on in my family and how do I navigate this difficult financial circumstance or whatever it may be. And I might go to another mentor about, what career move should I make next? So I think it's important to just surround yourself by different people that you can ask advice for, because it really, really does allow you to grow, and people that just genuinely care about you. View your mentorships as friendships, as relationships that you cultivate, like not a transaction. With my mentors, I don't just go to them and ask for things. I'm not constantly taking. That is just not a very good dynamic, to be honest, if you want to get the most out of your mentors. I actually view my mentors as friends. Like, I will message them happy birthday, I'll message them on their Christmas, I'll check in how their families are doing, and it goes both ways, like at the end of the day. And I think that's the mistake that a lot of people make when it comes to networking and mentoring, is just viewing things as very like black and white, very transactional. And I don't think those transactional relationships go as far as like a friendship would, the long term. So it's important to view it as that. And another piece of advice on this topic that comes from Tilly, who's a director at PwC in the legal team, and she said to have sponsors and mentors in your workplace. And I think this was a good piece of advice. Before she said this, I didn't even know what a sponsor was. So a mentor is someone who can guide you, whereas a sponsor is someone that can advocate for you when you're not in the room. Sponsors might advocate for you to get promoted. They might back you and say, oh yeah, Joe is so smart, he is so good at Excel, I think he's really good, I think you should get him on this project, or you should get him to do this, he'll do a great job. But she described it as very helpful in terms of career advancement as well. So great piece of advice from Tilly. The next piece of advice is be humble to take on feedback, and very, very specifically I'm saying be humble to take on feedback, not just be humble full stop, and I'll expand into what I mean. This piece of advice comes from a few people. It comes from Liz, who's a director of Microsoft, and it comes from Dean, who is a partner at my firm in consulting. Take on feedback and take on criticism. Why I say be humble is, don't ever think that you are finished learning, that you know everything, that you are above everybody else to the point where you can't take on feedback and criticism. That is a really poor way to think, and you need to instead have a growth mindset. So having the mindset that you will become a better version of yourself every day, and that you are not there yet, and that you never will be there, because we can never be perfect. There's always things that we can learn. In consulting, actually, I think this idea is practiced quite a lot, because we have something called upward feedback. So it's not only managers giving feedback to like a junior consultant like myself, but like I as a junior consultant would also give feedback to managers and partners in terms of how their management style is and how they're doing on the project as well, so that they can also continuously improve. Growth never stops. Like, you can continuously grow, you can continuously learn, and you can continuously become a better version of yourself. One really helpful piece of advice that Dean gave on this topic was about separating yourself. Detach your personal feelings from your professional self. If someone is criticizing your work, or they are giving you feedback on your work, on your slides, on your Excel, on your app, whatever it may be, just know that that's not a personal attack. That's not about you as a person. that's about you in a professional sense. So detach those two things, because otherwise it will get to a point where you view feedback and criticism as a personal attack on yourself and your character, and that's not helpful. If you cry every time, or if you have a breakdown every time you get a piece of feedback, or every time a manager tells you they don't like something that you produced or it could be better, then you are going to die. I'm not being dramatic, you will genuinely die. The most successful people can take on that feedback and that criticism and use it to grow instead of letting it beat them down. And I know sometimes that it's easier said than done, sometimes it's easy to get emotional, but I think that's important to remember that and just to reframe that and have a growth mindset. Now, the reason why I said my piece of advice is not being humble full stop is because yes, it is very important to be humble. Nobody likes someone that's overly arrogant. Humility is important in terms of your own values and personal growth, growing in life, and just being likable and not being an asshole. Really, no one likes working with an asshole. But I think it's equally as important not to be too humble. And this piece of advice actually came from Aaron, one of the co-founders of Choppity, in the sense of sometimes that's what distincts people from state educated backgrounds and privately educated backgrounds. And I noticed this too, actually. I was mostly state educated by experience going to private school on a scholarship, so I saw the differences between the two. The main difference was that when you come from a privately educated background or you come from privilege, a lot of the time that comes with a lot of self-confidence, in the sense of you are going to achieve certain things, or you know that you can achieve your dreams. Whereas a lot of the time when you come from underprivileged backgrounds, you don't back yourself as much, or you're almost too humble where you don't actually believe that you can achieve certain things. And that is something that I definitely struggled with and probably still struggle with as well, if I'm being completely honest. And also in the workplace, sometimes it's actually important to speak up about things that you've done. So this piece of advice came from my friend Kasrat. For example, if you have been going above and beyond and helping out with extra initiatives and firm-wide initiatives and blah blah blah, it's actually important to speak out and to take ownership for that, because if you don't, someone else will, and that will actually harm you in terms of advancing in your career and being promoted. So I think it's about finding a balance really in terms of humility and being confident. Even this advice actually applies nicely when you're doing interviews. Interviews are such weird scenarios because you have to sit and talk about yourself and sell yourself really. And if you're too humble in those situations to the point where you're not selling yourself and talking about your achievements enough, then you probably won't get the job, because they don't know you. They're not like inside your mind. They've not lived your life. They don't know everything you've been through and the things that you've achieved and where you've come from, where you are now, unless you tell them. So I think it's important to tell your story and to craft your story and find that balance. The next piece of advice, which again was repeated by a lot of my podcast guests, but mainly by Reggie Nelson and Joe Seddon. Joe is the CEO and founder of Zero Gravity. Be resilient and to embrace your background and where you come from. Use the challenges that you faced earlier in life or just in life in general as a foundation for resilience, motivation and drive. This is something that I had to do very early on, switching from that sort of defeatist mindset and thinking, oh, I can't achieve this thing, I can't ever be a consultant because of where I come from, or I can't ever do this because of where I come from. It's not possible for someone like me and for someone from my background. Instead of that, is using it as a drive to escape your circumstances. I've got a quote here from Joe where he said, "Had I not grown up in a single parent environment, I don't think I would have had the drive to defy the odds of getting into a top university and starting a company straight out of university." And he goes on to say that many successful people are actually running away from or trying to escape situations and their home life rather than running towards something. So I think that's really important in terms of reframing those hardships and knowing that even though there was such difficult circumstances to go through, and at the time you might be questioning why am I going through this and that and when can I get a break, reframing it to know that actually a lot of positive behaviors can be birthed out of those situations, such as resilience, perseverance, and determination. All of those behaviors are so essential in your career, and this comes from Kasserat. Don't give up. It's not going to be a walk in the park, so persevere. In your job, you're going to have so many days that beat you down. Not everything will be a walk in the park. Not everything will be smooth all the time. That's not how life works, especially in like demanding jobs and fields like consulting, investment banking, law. In intellectually stimulating environments, you are going to be challenged a lot. So it's important to be resilient and to persevere through those difficult moments and to not just give up. The most successful people don't give up. They keep on going. I had a friend that was given a really, really difficult Excel task. They cried about it, which to be honest, I probably would as well, because quant stuff does scare me a bit too. But then guess what? They came back and she did it. Like, she didn't give up. She didn't just stop there and then not do it and tell the manager, oh, I can't do it. She took it as a learning experience rather than letting it beat her down. That was really beautiful actually, because it shows the importance of perseverance in your job. Outside of your job, before you get the job, listen, you're going to be rejected 100 times, and I think the quicker you accept that rejection is a part of life, the easier it will become. Before I got this job, I think I was rejected from about 10 different places. For my first year internships, I was also rejected quite a few times. When I was applying to university, I've got a video on my channel about being rejected from Cambridge, so you all know I'm a Cambridge reject, and I was also rejected from Warwick as well. Shout out to Warwick. But the point is that rejection is so like ingrained into life. You can't just always get every single thing that you want, and quite frankly, if you could, life would be really boring. Again, that resilience is important there too, because if I had given up after my 9th rejection for my job, then I never would have got this one. Or if I had given up after getting rejected from Cambridge and thought, okay, cool, I'm gonna pack it in, I'm not gonna apply anywhere else, then I wouldn't have gone to LSE and experienced the things that I got to experience. So it's important not to give up, because you don't know when the next opportunity is coming. You don't know if it's literally right after the rejection. There's a picture of this guy and he's like mining through, I think he's mining through a cave to try and find gold, and then he gives up because he's been mining for ages, and where he gives up, the gold is literally right there. Like, if he had just kept going like one more second, a couple more steps, he would have hit the jackpot. That is such a beautiful illustration really of the concept that I'm describing, and in terms of the importance of being resilient. For me, that's always why I'm actually quite proud of my background, and it was really difficult growing up, and I'm not saying it was easy, but I think it has actually really helped me, and I never thought I would be saying this, but those experiences that I had in my early childhood have really helped me to just be a go-getter and to just have drive. The next piece of advice is to not be afraid to be a beginner. This piece of advice comes from Joe, Zara, Aaron, and I also got it from Courtney and Renee, the hosts of To My Sisters. Again, this is one that has been quite common in terms of the advice that I've received. You don't ever start something as an expert, you start as a beginner, and it's important to embrace that. The first attempt will be shit compared to the last attempt. Remember what I said earlier, it takes 10,000 hours to master something as well. So there will be a lot of trial and error. I think a good example in this is starting a YouTube channel. The first video on my channel, if I go back and watch it, I will cringe at the editing and at how rubbish it sounds. Even though the advice was good, the video itself was diabolical. Like, I was editing on iMovie for the longest time before I switched over to Final Cut Pro. I was filming on my phone, like I didn't have a tripod, it was like balancing on books. Like, you have to start from somewhere, and if I was a perfectionist and thought, oh no, I can't put this out, this isn't perfect, then I never ever would have started. And if you don't start, you won't get better at something, because you have to start from somewhere and then get feedback, use that feedback to improve. Like, it's an iterative process. Like, I got feedback from friends and family, from you guys, about what I could do to make my videos better, and then slowly it gets better. And this isn't even the end result, it's still gonna keep on growing. And that's just in the context of YouTube. This also applies to businesses. So Joe Aaron and Zara were all talking about this in the context of developing an app. If they were hung up on this idea of being an expert at the start and perfectionism, they never ever would have released the first version of their app. And it was important to release that first version because then they got feedback from investors about how they could change it and how they could improve it. And it becomes this continuous process and cycle of killing your babies, killing your versions of your work to getting to a really good end result. It's important to embrace being a beginner and knowing that your start result is not your end result. The next piece of advice is to stay curious and to keep learning. This piece of advice came from my friend who is also a consultant at my firm, Toby. You don't just stop learning at school, which I think is quite a common misconception. You're always continuously learning and you never know enough. And in Toby's words, the most successful people are always learning. They're always reading, they're always learning a new skill, they're always picking up something new. There's never like enough knowledge. There's always something more that you could be learning, trust me. Keep updating your knowledge and your skills, stay relevant in your field. I feel like industries are always changing so much, especially things like tech. There's always more that you can be learning. Take an interest as well outside of your immediate field. I think having a wider knowledge is such a good piece of advice, whether that's current affairs, whatever it may be, because it can actually really help in terms of what you're doing as well. And this piece of advice comes from Kasra. Ask questions to learn, don't just be mute. I feel like this applies really well in consulting. So you might be given a project, you might not understand what you're being asked to do at all. In fact, this probably will happen a lot. If you just sit in silence and don't ask the questions, you're not curious enough to ask the question, or you're not brave enough to ask the questions, which can also happen, then you're going to find yourself starting this task, spending 5 hours not understanding what you're doing because you didn't ask questions about the foundations, and then 10 hours later you've produced something that is incorrect because you didn't ask questions at the start, or you hit a roadblock and you can't progress any further and now you're crying in the bathroom. It's really important, and I know it's easier said than done, but it's really important to actually ask those questions at the start as well, and throughout. When I was in my internship, I would always be asking other consultants or my team questions like how to do this thing, how can I do this, can you teach me the shortcut in Excel. Asking those questions is key to your growth. Obviously there's a limit, like don't be annoying and ask like a billion gazillion questions at inappropriate times. Like imagine if in a client meeting you're just asking questions. Like there is definitely a right time and place for these things, but I'm sure you guys know that and you know what I'm trying to say. The next piece of advice, and this comes from Toby, and I thought this was a really good one because I actually hadn't thought about it at all. Setting personal standards and intrinsic motivations. It's really important to have your motivations come from yourself and to be an internal thing. The example that he gave is a lot of the time in friendship groups, particularly in male friendship group, you'll compare yourself to others and define your success based on others around you. If they have a car, then you need to get that car, you need to get a better car. Or if they are a manager at work, then you need to be promoted to manager. The danger in that is that you actually limit yourself because you're setting your goals based on others. For example, imagine if all of your friends around you get promoted to manager, but then you get promoted to manager as well because you've worked to be at the same place they are, when actually you could have gone further and you could have been promoted to a C-suite position, but you limited yourself because you were just comparing to others and setting your standards based on others. So it's important for things to come from within. I also think this is good advice because it's important to like avoid unhealthy comparison traps. Yes, it's okay to look up to people. I have so many people that I look up to, but it's important to remember that you are on your own journey. This is your own life, your own path, and it's not going to look the same as anybody else's. It's very important to define your own success regardless of societal norms or peer achievements or things that you're seeing around you, and to make sure that things come from within. I actually have already given 10 pieces of advice, but because I love you all, this is a bonus. So advice number 11, last but not least, find time for love. Find time for love. And this might sound cringe, but guys, it is so true. Not everything is about becoming CEO or becoming Elon Musk. That's not what life is cut out to be, and that's not the be all and end all. And this advice comes from Aleesha Banner, shout out to you, and it is remembering that not everything is about careers. You need to have time for love, for family, for your friends, for relationships, for yourself, because you have to have love in your life. Like, you need to have love in your life. Not every single thing is about advancing in your career, and actually having time for love in your life will allow you to be more successful. Because if you think about it, it's actually very important to prioritize self-love, in the sense of it's important to prioritize your mental and physical health. If you're not mentally sound and taking care of yourself and making sure you're staying sane, staying true to yourself, like what I said earlier, and having hobbies, just doing what makes you you, you're going to lose yourself and find yourself in a very dark place. On the physical health point, if you're not getting enough sleep, if you're not taking care of your gut health, if you're not having the right vitamins, you're not getting enough exercise, then you won't actually be able to perform or function to your optimal self. You'll find yourself being grudgy. Have you guys ever had that feeling? Like, I know I have. If I've just been eating McDonald's and I'm on 2 hours sleep, I can't perform at my best. If you're not performing at your best, how are you meant to advance in your career? A healthy body and mind are your greatest assets in achieving long-term success. So don't forget that. So I think that is one that is easily brushed under the rug. Oh, okay, that is the end. I'm such a waffler. You can tell I've got a podcast because I just be waffling. Hopefully there was a few gems in there. I really hope this was helpful, and this is a very different style of video compared to the other videos that I've done. So if you like it, please let me know. Please give a thumbs up. Please comment down below. Let me know in the comments which piece of advice out of these 11 pieces of advice resonated with you most, and if you have any other pieces of advice that I didn't mention in this video, please comment them below. I want the comment section to just be flooded with like advice and positivity. Thank you so much. If you actually got to the end of this, you're actually a trooper for listening to me for this long. Also, thank you so much to all of my friends that I randomly called, and to all of the guests that have come onto my podcast, and all of my mentors that have, you know, either directly or indirectly contributed to this video. But anyway, have a great week, have a productive week, take care of yourself, and dream big. Bye.